Dear students, so today our topic is the spinal cord. So already you know, so spinal cord play an important role in the regulations of the locomotions as well as the body movements because it is directly interconnected with the our skeletal muscles. Our skeletal muscles so they're mainly inverted by the spinal cord. So what are directions that can transmitted from the spinal cord? So with the help of the brain or without help of the brain, then also the spinal cord can initiate the contraction and as well as the relaxations of the skeletal muscle, and that property of skeletal muscle is helpful for various locomotions or motor activity, for example walking, running, sitting, as well as holding some things. Okay, so the movements of the leg, movements of the head, and movements of the hand, as well as the skeletal muscles, so those are involved in the inspiration as well as the expirations. So those are also inverted by a spinal nerves or with the help of spinal cord. The spinal nerves, so they are inverted in the various respiratory muscles like intercostal muscle as well as the extracostal muscle. So they are, their contraction and relaxation was helpful for the regulations of the respirations, so along with the diaphragm. So that's why the spinal cord, it is one of the main parts of the central nervous system. So it is helpful for to create a connections between the brain and as well as that of with the organs. Okay, so spinal cord, it is arises the from the midbrains or extended parts of the medulla oblongata. So that spinal cord, it can be extended inside the, that is the vertebral columns or along with the vertebral column, and it is inverted in the many organs. So whenever the motor activity is needed or locomotions is needed or certain activities needed, so on that time, so this spinal cord is acts as the interconnectors between the brain as well as the, so that of with the organ. So that's why the spinal cords play an important role in the regulations of the various motor activities or various functions. Okay, so regarding the introductions of spinal cord, so spinal cord is the most important structure between the body and the brains. Okay, so it is the one of the important part or structure, so that was helpful for to create the connections between the different parts of the body, so that of with the brain. It means the brain or the nervous system, it can control the organ function, so with the help of the spinal cord, because it can create the interconnections between the different parts of the brain, so that of with the organs. So spinal cord, it can extended so along with the vertebral column. Okay, it can arises from the end parts of the medulla oblongata or the extended parts of the medulla oblongata, that is the arises of the spinal cord. Okay, so that spinal cord, it can extend it throughout the vertebral column. It can passes through the skull through a foramen magnum. So foramen magnum is the one hole, so in the skull, in the bottom of the skull, so that was helpful for the extent of the various nerves as well as blood vessels. Okay, so among them the spinal cord is also extend from the foramen magnums and is continuously it extends along with the vertebral column, and it is the extended parts of the medulla oblongata. Okay, so it is also create an vital link between the brain and that of with the body or from body to the brain. Okay, it is a create an interconnections between brain to body or different parts of the body towards the brain. So that's why the spinal cord, it was involved in the to convey both sensory as well as the motor information. Sensory information, so they carries from organ to the brain, and motor information from brain to the organ. Okay, so here the spinal cord, so it can convey the both type of the impulses, motor as well as the sensory. So that's why It is play an important role in that to create the vital link between the brain and body to the brain. So regarding spinal cord length, so it is a 40 to 50 centimeter long, and regarding diameter, that is 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeter in a diameter. So this is regarding the length of the spinal cord. So spinal cords in the both side, okay. So there is a root is arises. Okay, the spinal cords in the both sides, the roots are arises. So these are the spinal nerves. Okay, the both side. So spinal cord, it can display or consist of the 31 pairs of the spinal nerves, and each spinal nerves, so they are inverted in the different organs, especially so they are inverted in the skeletal muscles or somatic muscles where they are present. So like that spinal cord, so with the help of the spinal nerve, okay, so it is involved in the regulations of the organ functions. So unlike cerebral hemisphere, it is also consist of the two matters or two layer, that is the gray matter as well as the white matters. Okay, spinal cord is mainly divided into four regions, that is the cervical spinal cords region, thoracic spinal cord region, lumbar region, as well as the sacral regions. So as the name of the vertebral column where that spinal cord is present, so that region name is named according to the name of the vertebral column. So that's why, so whatever the spinal cord, it is present in the cervical vertebral column along with, so that was known as the cervical regions. So those are present in the along with the thoracic vertebral column. So that was known as the thoracic region. So like that, it is known as the lumbar regions. Then also as well as the sacral regions. So as you know, the spinal cord, it convey both motor as well as the sensory information due to presence of the motor and sensory nerve fibers. Okay, so next one. So regarding the cross sectional or perspective view of the spinal cord. So this is the typical cross sectional view of the spinal cord. So it is consist of the three layer, that is the dura mater, arachnoid matter, okay, so as well as the pia matters. So like the cerebral hemisphere, okay, or cerebral cortex or brain, it is also covered with a three layer. The same layer was extended toward the spinal cord. So that's why the spinal cord is also covered by the three layers. So outermost layer is known as the dura mater, and innermost layer is known as the arachnoid matter, and most innermost layer, that was known as the pia mater. So between the space between the dura mater and arachnoid matter, that was known as the subdural cavity, and between the arachnoid and subarachnoid, that space was known as the subarachnoid cavity. So this is the reasons for the spinal ganglion, and this is the reasons for the arises of the spinal nerves. In the both side, the spinal nerves are arises, both in the ascending as well as the descending sides. Okay, in the both side, the spinal nerves are arises. And regarding the space between pia matter and arachnoid matter, that was known as the subarachnoid cavity. So this subarachnoid cavity, it can filled with the fluid, so that fluid is known as the cerebrospinal fluid. So this fluid, it consists of the reach of the wbc, reach of the lymphocytes, so reach of the nutritions, reach of the electrolytes, and as well as it consists of the respiratory gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide, and nitrogens. So like that, the cerebrospinal fluid in the brain, it can nourish the brain or different parts of the brain, and same fluid, it can extended or it was present around the spinal cord. So that is same, that is the cerebrospinal fluid. So here this fluid, so in the spinal cord, it is also here, it can nourish the spinal cord. So whenever spinal cord, it can recover the nutrition. So when the blood vessels they are fail our circulation, so they are failed to supply the nutrition means, so on that time the spinal cord they can got the nutrition from the fluid with the help of the cerebrospinal fluid. So that's why the cerebrospinal fluid it is helpful for to nourish the spinal cord as well as the different parts of the brain, and as well as cerebrospinal fluid it can prevent the mechanical as well as the physical and chemical injury of the spinal cord. So due to workload or stress, okay, so any injury if happens in the spinal cord means for the spinal cord it can prevent that ones. If it still is stronger, then only the spinal cord injuries occurs. But in the light, so this spinal fluid it acts as the shock absorber, and as well as it can prevent the mechanical as well as the chemical injury to the spinal cord. So that's why the spinal cord it is the protective fluid. It can prevent the any kind of injury to the brain as well as to the our spinal cord. If any inflammation in the spinal cord, that is sorry, in the cerebrospinal fluid, then it can create the problem in the normal functions of the spinal cord. Okay, because the surrounding area and spinal cord function is mainly depending upon the cerebrospinal fluid. If any inflammation in the cerebrospinal fluid, then also the spinal cord function should be abnormal. So on that time, so where the it is abnormal, so that parts of the organ should be failure, so that condition was known as the paralysis. So that's why if any malfunction in the cerebral spinal fluid, that also reflects on the functions of the spinal cord. So this is the cross sectional overview of the spinal cord. It is also like a cerebral hemisphere. It is also consist of the three layer dura mater, organoid matter as well as the pia matters, and it is also consist of the subarachnoid cavity, so that can filled with the cerebrospinal fluid in the both end. It is allow the arising of the spinal nerve in the both end, both in the ascending as well as the descending. So now we learn regarding the functions of the spinal cord. So spinal cord it's play an important role in the conductions of the impulses both up and as well as the down, okay, towards the brain as well as towards the down. Okay, so that is the spinal cord. It is involved in the both ascending pathway as well as the descending pathway, because it mainly consists of the ascending for nervous fibers as well as the descending nervous fibers. So that's why it was involved in the conductions of the that is the nerve informations or impulses both in the upside as well as the downside. So that's why it's play important role in the conductions of the impulses, okay, as well as the spinal cord it's play an important role in the regulations of the locomotions. So what are the locomotions are there? So they are regulated by the spinal cord, so with the help of the spinal nerve. If any problem in the spinal cord means, then we are suffering from the paralysis. For example, in lumbar regions, okay, if the spinal cord break means the lower parts or lower limb, so they are suffering from the paralysis. Okay, in the lumbar regions, if any injuries occurs during the accident, during the drivings or during the abnormal sleeping pattern, okay, so on that time the lumbar regions, okay, so that was injured, so that was known as the spinal bifida. Okay, so due to that, so we are suffering from the paralysis of the lower limb. If any cervical having the problem in the cervical region means, so then we having the problem in the or paralysis in the upper limbs or in the hands. Okay, so like that the spinal cord it was mainly helpful for to regulations of the locomotions regarding the writing skill or holding the objects, as well as locomotions, running, walking, even the sitting posture. So that was regulated by the skeletal muscle, and those are known as the locomotion, and that's why the spinal cords it was play an important role in the regulations of the locomotions. And spinal cord it is also involved in the regulations of the reflexes. So dear students, certain actions are there in our body without our brain knowledge, without our conscious. So those are occurs without our knowledge, without knowledge to the brain. So that actions is occurs. For example, so removal of the hand from the gas. Okay, so when you are cooking, so when your hand is exposed to the hot area or on the flame, automatically without your brain knowledge, okay, so your hand can be drawn, okay, without your brain knowledge, okay, such actions was known as the reflexes. Many actions are there, so automatically we can beat the any friends. Okay, if we any pinning to our hand means automatically hit to that person, that is also one type of the reflexes. Automatically we can bend our leg, okay, without knowledge, without conscious to the brain. Okay, so these all are the reflexes. So the spinal cord it can involved in the regulations of the withdrawal movements or protective movements functions of the body, those are known as the reflexes. And as well as spinal cord, so along with the brain and peripheral nerves, so these are also involved in the two regulations of the reflexes. So that's why the spinal cord it was play an important role in the regulations of the reflexes or defense mechanisms or actions, so that was needed for the body. So those are regulated by the spinal cord. So that's why the spinal cords it's play an important role in the regulations of the conductions of impulses as well as the locomotions and as well as the reflexes. So next one, so regarding the spinal cord and its nerve. So spinal cords and its nerves, so they are mainly named according to the reasons. So they are from the arises. Certain are known as the cervical nerves. So their arises in the cervical regions are in the area of the cervical vertebral columns. So they are 18 numbers. Okay, cervical nerves. So they are cervical spinal nerves. So they are the 18 number. And so those are arises in the thoracic regions are as well as, so those are arises in the thoracic vertebral column area. So those are known as the thoracic nerves or thoracic spinal nerves. So these are 12 in numbers. Okay, and those are arises in the lumbar regions are in the lumbar bones, and those are known as the lumbar nerves or lumbar spinal nerves. So these are 5 in number, and those are arises in the sacral regions, and those are known as the sacral nerve. So these are 5 in numbers, and one pair, so that was arise from the coccyx bone or coccyx regions. So that was known as the coccygeal number. This is 1 in numbers. In both side the of the spinal cord, the spinal nerve is arises. So that's why, so they are consist of the 31 pair of the spinal nerves. So spinal cord it mainly consists of the 31 pairs of the spinal nerves. So spinal cord, so with the help of the these 31 pairs of spinal nerves, it was involved in the to create the connections between the brain and different parts of the body or different organs of the body. So they are 8 pairs of the cervical nerves, 12 pairs of the thoracic nerves, and 5 pairs of the lumbar nerves, and 5 pairs of the sacral nerves, and 1 pair of the coccygeal nerves. And like that, they are totally 31 pairs of the spinal nerves. So they are present in the human body. So regarding the functions of the spinal nerves, so the cranial spinal nerves, they are 18 number or 8 pairs in number. So they are mainly inverted in the head, are mainly inverted in the diaphragm, are mainly inverted in the neck as well as the shoulder, and as well as, so they are inverted arise from the in the
cervical region and inverted in the organ like a head, diaphragm, as well as the neck, shoulder, and upper limb. So that's why the cervical spinal nerves, so they are play an important role in the head movement as well as diaphragm movements. So diaphragm movement is helpful for the inspiration as well as the expressions. If any injury in the cervical nerves, then also it can create the problem in the respirations. If any injury, so due to wrong pathway of the sleeping patterns or any injury towards the traveling or accident during the sports, so if any injury on the cervical nerves means, so there is a problem in the inspirations because the diaphragm movements, so those are regulated by the cervical spinal nerves. If injury in the cervical regions or on the cervical vertebral bones means, so if it can create the damage of the cervical spinal nerves, then so there is a no movement of the diaphragm, then it can create the problem in the respiration. So that's why the cervical spinal nerves, they also play an important role in the respirations or the movements of the diaphragm. And as well as the cervical nerves, so they are play an important role in regulations of the neck as well as the shoulder movements. So neck and shoulder movements, so these are also regulated by the skeletal muscle, and those skeletal muscles are inverted by the that is cervical spinal nerves. So due to that, the spinal nerves from the cervical region, so those are involved in the regulations of the neck as well as the shoulder movements. And as well as, so whatever the upper limb movements are there, your hand movements are there, so those are also regulated by the cervical nerves. Okay, that is withdrawal of the hand from the source of the heat or injury, and as well as writing skill. Okay, so whatever are holding up the object, so these all are the functions of the upper limb, so those are regulated by the cervical spinal nerves. If any problem in cervical nerve, then also we can lose the all the functions of the our hand, including the writing skill and holding the object skill, even the touch. Okay, so next one, so regarding the functions related to the thoracic spinal nerves, so these thoracic spinal nerves, so they arises from the thoracic regions or from the thoracic vertebral columns. So these are inverted in the all the thoracic organs like lungs, costal, intercostal muscles, even in the diaphragms. So these all are the parts of the thoracic cavity. So where the thoracic spinal nerves are arises, so they are inverted in the those organs. And thoracic spinal nerves, so they are the 12 in numbers. Okay, so these are mainly involved in the thoracic movement, especially the ribs movements. So ribs movements, so they are mainly helpful for the breathings. So if the ribs are raised, so then the inspiration is occurs. If the ribs are raises due to contractions of the respiratory muscles, those are present along with the ribs or between the ribs. So if they are contracted means, so the especially extracostal muscle, so the inspiration is occurs. Okay, if other respiratory muscle is relaxed means, then expiration is occur. So that's why the thoracic spinal nerves, so they are involved in the regulations of the thoracic movements during the breathing. So that's why the thoracic spinal nerves are is also involved in the regulations of the breathing, especially inspiration or expiration or inhalation or exhalations. Okay, so next one, so these are also to control the tone of the postural back muscles. Okay, the tone nothing but certain contractions properties, a certain ability of the muscles of the back. Okay, so those are known as the tone. So here thoracic nerves, they also regulate the tone in the back muscles as well as, so they are involved in the movements of the vertebral column that was required for the equilibrium balancing of the body and adjustment of the balance of body during the locomotion. So these are the various functions of the thoracic spinal nerves. So next one is the lumbar nerves or lumbar spinal nerves. So they are five pairs in number. So they mainly play an important role in the hip movements. So whatever lower leg movements are there, so they are regulated by the lumbar spinal nerves. So next one is the, that is sacral nerves. So these are regulate the lower limb movements and as well as the coccygeal nerves. So these are also involved in the regulations of the hip movements or body movements on the lower parts, especially in the sexual intercourse. So these muscles play an important role in the body movement. So these are the various functions related to the spinal nerves. So they like that the spinal nerves are spinal cords. So with the help of the spinal nerves, it was involved in the regulations of the various organ functions or body functions. So they are 31 pairs. So next one, so regarding the spinal reflexes. So reflexes is nothing but some unplanned or involuntary or sequence of actions or certain uh, instantaneous movements in response to the any stimuli. So those are known as the reflex or reflex actions. So reflex is made possible by the neural pathway. So those are called the reflex arc, which is act as an impulse before that impulse reaches to the brain. Okay, reflex arc is nothing but the pathway of the reflex actions or the pathway of the movement and returns of the impulses regarding from organ to the effector organs or organ to the spinal cord. So those are known as that pathway was known as the reflex arc, and the reflex is the automatic response to a stimulus. It does not refuse or need to conscious thought. Without knowledge of brain, certain reflexes is occurs. Okay, so that was the one of the features of the reflex actions. Without conscious, then also so they are regulated. It means without our knowledge, certain body movements will occurs in our body, and those are known as the reflex or reflex actions. So these reflex action, so they are mainly classified into two types: monosynaptic reflex and polysynaptic reflex. Monosynaptic reflex, the reflex pathway with only one synapses between sensory and motor neurons. Okay, so there is no other neuron or parts of the brain is involved. Okay, direct action is occurs without knowledge to your brain. Okay, only the sensory neuron and motor neurons directly the sensory message pass to the motor neurons without any other third neurons, and such pathway was known as the monosynaptic reflexes. Example is a knee jerk. Okay, so here someone pin it to the knee. Okay, here, so this is the pin. So someone pin on the knee, automatically the our knee can be jerked upward or withdrawn from that source. Okay, so that is the without any involvement of the third neuron. So these the sensory neurons, they can carry these sensation toward the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord directly, so they are enter in the motor neurons without any other neurons or interneurons. Then our leg will be the jerk, and such type of reflexes, okay, there is no involvement of the another neurons or interneurons or parts of the brain, or without knowledge to brain is occurs, and such reflexes are known as the monosynaptic reflexes. It is occurs between sensory receptor and sensory neuron, then motor neuron and effector organs. So there is no another interneuron is involved in the integrations of that message. Okay, and such reflexes are known as the monosynaptic reflexes. And polysynaptic reflexes, one or more interneurons are involved. So they are create the connections between the afferent sensory and motor neurons. Okay, or motor signals. And such reflexes, there is involvement of the one or more interneurons or parts of the brain, and such reflexes are known as a polysynaptic reflexes. Example is a withdrawal of the hand from the source of the heat. Okay, it was detected by the sensory receptor, and that message carried toward the spinal cord by a sensory neuron. So here another neuron is present, that was known as the interneuron. It is one of the part of the brain. So that interneuron integrate that message what happens in the organ, then it can find out the solution. Please withdraw your hand. Okay, so that integrated message from the one interneuron or more interneuron that carry towards the organ. So with the help of the motor neuron, then the effector organ which can withdraw the hand from the source of the pain. Okay, that is the effector organ which can withdraw from the source of pain. So here the same pathway is present, that the message was conveyed between the effector, that is sensory receptor, then sensory neuron, then motor neuron, then effector organ. Then action is occurs. But one another interneuron is present to integrate that message. So that's why such reflex action. So where another parts of the brain or another neuron is involved, and such reflexes is known as the polysynaptic reflexes. And certain reflexes are there without involvement of the interneurons directly, the sensory message is conveyed to the motor neurons. Okay, sensory neuron can convey the sensation to the directly to the motor neurons without involvement of the any interneurons, and such reflexes is known as a monosynaptic reflexes, and involvement of interneurons, so those are known as the polysynaptic reflexes. So like that the reflexes, so they are mainly classified into two types: monosynaptic reflexes as well as the polysynaptic reflexes. So next is the reflex arc. It is a complete or entire pathway followed by the sensory and motor impulses during a reflex action is called the reflex arc. There is a pathway, the convey of the message between sensory and motor neuron. So that entire pathway is known as a reflex arc, may be polysynaptic or may be monosynaptic reflex. But that pathway was known as the reflex arc. Okay, so now we can study regarding the components of the reflex action or its conductions or reflex arc. So reflex arc pathway is mainly divided into five components. One is the receptor, that is known as the sensory receptor. It is present in the organ. Okay. Another one is a second component is a sensory neuron. So they can carries the what message was generated in the skin. That is the effector. That is organ. That is a receptor in the organ. So that message is carried towards the spinal cord. That is the work of the sensory neurons. And third component of the reflex arc is a integration center or interneuron. So that message came from the sensory neuron from the receptors of the organ that was integrated. Okay, integrated or integration is occurs, that the center that was known as the interneuron or integration center. Then motor neuron, so that integrated message or answer from the interneuron to carry towards the organ or effector organ. So that was known as the motor neuron. Next one is the effector organ. So that is the, so where the effect is shows. So that was known as the effector. Simple. So someone is a pin to your hand. Okay. So automatically sometime you shout on that candidate, or sometime you can hit to that candidate or be to that candidate, and sometime you can withdraw your hand and silently you maintain the silency according to situation. Okay, if in the running class is there, some your friend is pinning to your hand means the sir is strict means you can keep the silent, you will not beat your friend. Okay, if you are outside the class, so there is no one is there to control to you. So on that time, anyone irritate you means automatically you can beat your friend. Okay, so like that the message was integrated in the integration center, and the source of the pain is occurs in the organ, so that was detected and converted into a message. So that is the work of the sensory organ or sensory receptor. So that stimuli is converted into a electrical signal, and those are known as the nerve impulses. So okay, so that is the first component of reflex arc or pathway or reflex action is a receptor or sensory receptor. So they are present in the near to the sensory organ or inside the sensory organ. So their major function is they can detect the stimuli in that organ or changes in the organ, and those stimuli is converted into a electrical signal or action potential or nerve impulses. That is the work of the receptor or sensory organ or the first component of the reflex action or reflex arc. Their major function is, so they are present in the organ. So water stimuli is occurs or changes is occurs in the organ, detect that one. So that information is converted into in the form of the electrical signal or action potential or simple current. So that was known as the nerve impulses. So that nerve impulses carried towards the integrated place. So where we can find the solution. Okay, solution is found in the interneuron, and interneuron is the one parts of the brain. Okay, so where the neurons are present, especially cerebral cortex. And regarding the skeletal muscle function, cerebellum is there, midbrain is there, pons is there. So they have the nuclei. So they are involved in the integrations of the that is the primary sensory reflexes. Okay, so that new interneuron present at that part. So were, so this second component of reflex are, that is the sensory neuron. So they carries the that is the message in the form of the impulses from the sensory organ towards the integrated place or towards the interneuron or towards the parts of the brain where the answer is produces from this problem. This is the problem. Stimuli, some, for example, someone is pinned to the hand. That is stimuli. That stimuli was converted into a nerve impulses by a receptor. Then that nerve impulses reaches to the your medulla oblongata or your specially cerebral cortex or cerebellum. That is the work of the sensory neuron. Their message, their function is they carries the, they conveys the stimuli in the form of nerve impulses towards the integration center or interneuron. And the third component is a integration center. It was involved in the to carries the message from the sensory neuron and find out the solutions. Okay, message say sensory neuron, from sensory neuron it carry message. What can it do? Okay, if you're in the class means the answer is created. Sir in the sir is in the class. The class is going on very well. There is no need to irritate that our friend. Simply you can withdraw the hand. So like that answer was generated. Or if it is fully painful, then you can beat your friend. Okay, like that answer is created. Or it is told to you, you also pin to that person strongly, then he can stop that nonsense things. So like that, that message was generated or integrated in the integration center. That is the third component of the reflex actions or reflex arc. Then that integrated message reaches to the effector organ towards your hand, or sometimes in through your leg you can hit to your friend, okay, by using the leg. Are you using the your pen and be to that your friend? Okay, like that, that message reaches to the effector organ. So with the help of the another group of neuron, those are known as the motor neuron. So their function is they carries the integrated message from interneurons to the effector organ. That is the fourth components of the reflex arc or reflex action. Then that message reaches to the effector organ. So according to that, so that part or effector organ will be show the action by involving in the contractions and relaxation. Then it was involved in the to show the action. So that was known as the effector or motor organ. So these are the five components of the pathway of the reflex action or conduction or reflex arc. Okay, so but only difference is in monosynaptic reflexes. So this integration center is not present. Only receptor, sensory neuron, motor neuron, effector organ. Only four components is present. In the case of the polysynaptic reflexes, the another component, the integration center is present. But in the both time, the defensive phenomena or function will be the occurs. So those are known as the reflex actions.